Cancelled and lost video games. What are they all about? Well, to explain it in a very unfairly short way, it's basically video games that should have been released, but weren't in the end because of several reasons. It could be anything from internal economic struggles, drama among the developers, the game being too violent for the publishers, or sometimes the game just never existed. The internal drama and politics in development and publishing studios are not to be undermined. There have been several games that never got as far as they should or could. More than you would have first thought. A quite interesting topic showing us not only the insides of how games are made and molded, but also gives us a new look into the many franchises and companies we loved and thought we knew so much. So that is what we are going to take a closer look at today. The lost and cancelled video game Iceberg. And everything it has to show us. Starting off with perhaps the best example, Half-Life 2 Episode 3, or just Half-Life 3, is a game that is known for being cancelled and forever in development. The Half-Life series is a series that is still waiting to be finished, ending off with Episode 2 in the middle of the story, clearly leading up to a new episode. It just kind of didn't happen. And still, to this day, Valve have said that they don't have it in development. Valve is still eager to make more Half-Life games and games in general, evidently. But when it comes to the main Half-Life games, they seem to be content? Some say it's because leaving the series with a missing finale, it might make the whole series more interesting. The series with no end, if you please. Releasing Half-Life 3 might then kill off the excitement of the game, but that is clearly bullshit. The best example is most likely that they just don't need a third one because they're just so stinking rich, or that they just don't have any ideas for it, or something else. To be honest, it is kind of a mystery why they don't make the third one. It just kind of is right there. But until that fateful day when game can count to 3, we must just sit here and wait for the next episode, which, again, might not come out.
Attention residents.
Ura Zelda isn't that much of a game in itself, but more an expansion for Ocarina of Time for the N64. It came in the form of a N64 disk drive, which would expand on the game, fixing a few problems and adding more difficult dungeons. It would quite literally be a longer and improved version of the game. The disc was even made along with Zelda Gaiden, another expansion of Ocarina of Time, which would totally change the game's layout and story. However, producing such an expansion apparently took way too long and had to be delayed several times. Eventually, it was decided to put the 2 discs away until it could be used for something else. And while Zelda Gaiden was picked up again, being modified and made into its own game, now under the name of Majora's Mask, Ura Zelda never got that far, only using small snippets of the expansion in Ocarina of Time, Master Quest, and Wind Waker. Besides that, it still sits somewhere in the vault in the Nintendo headquarters in Japan. So it is still out there, but you are never gonna play it, so just give up, loser. Sorry. Super Mario 64 was one hell of a hit when it came out back in the day, being played by a bunch of kids when it came out. This, inevitably, also meant that some of the fans wanted more of the same, wanting a sequel. Now, while that has been done in the form of Sunshine, Galaxy, and so on, the names of which the children thought the next game would be called were quite funny. Super Mario 64 2, Super Mario 65, Super Mario 128, and many different numbers. Now, while that could just be laughed at as nothing more than children not knowing what was called Super Mario 64, Super Mario 64 2 was apparently the code name for a Mario game being made in 1999, but was scrapped before we as a fanbase could see what it actually was. The game was going to be for the Nintendo 64 DD, but was scrapped as they realized that the 64 DD was absolute trash. However, what was made of Super Mario 64 2 was most likely implemented into later 3D titles that Nintendo also made. So while I never got a game with a title as silly as 64 2, we have, most likely, gotten the game mechanics and levels somewhere, without even realizing it. Mega Man Universe was going to be a game for the Xbox and PlayStation, which didn't really go anywhere. It was going to be a 2.5D side-scrolling platformer, like usual, being heavily inspired by Mega Man 2, just like some other games in the franchise. Along with that, it also featured constructed custom level mechanics, where you could both add on to already existing levels and make your own entirely new Mega Man levels from scratch. A bit like Mario Maker, but before was cool. Production began in 2010, and both had a trailer featuring Ryu and Arthur, and a sweet soundtrack made by the Megas. I can see what they chose them. The game apparently also tried something new with the art direction and controls, yet we don't know what that actually was. We just know that it was heavily critiqued from the higher-ups. It seems that the team behind the Mega Man universe were a bit too ambitious, as the game was cancelled due to various circumstances, or in other words, too much shit went wrong, so they started from scratch. The game was again ambitious, as it had a bunch of new additions to the Mega Man universe, perhaps a hint in the title. Yet going too far from the original Mega Man shtick was apparently a fatal error, leading to the cancellation of the game. Sonic X-treme was a game that was well on its way to being the first ever 3D Sonic game and the first original Sonic game for the Sega Saturn. It even had a film tie-in in the making. A game that could have had quite the legacy, yet that didn't happen. The gameplay of the game is no surprise. Sonic rapidly going through 3D levels, akin to later 4D titles like Sonic Adventures and Sonic Lost Worlds, both of which had elements borrowed from X-treme. The storyline too is akin to other games, with Sonic trying to stop Robotnik from stealing 6 magical rings from Tiara Boobowski. What a name, why that? While the game had all the properties to be a successful game, it was of course cancelled, not too much because of the game in itself, but because of unfortunate events outside of the game, mainly development and publishing. The game ran on an engine designed by Chris Coffin, who also worked on the game, who also sadly contracted walking pneumonia. Along with that, the lead designer got so sick that he was told he only had 6 months left to live, yet survived afterwards. Along with that, the rest of the team didn't have the best morale and will to continue work, especially after 2 of the most important people on the project were off the table for unforeseen reasons. So, after an unavoidable delay, the game was cancelled for good, since the game simply couldn't be finished in the conditions it found itself in. A rather sad and unfair way for a game to end up in a garbage bin, especially one so promising as this one. When it comes to lost or cancelled games, then Agent is a game that almost always pops up. For good reasons, of course. It was, after all, going to be a full-fledged game and title made by a major publisher like Rockstar, and was therefore going to be side by side with games like GTA. As it seems they plan on making Agent a full-fledged game franchise, exploring stealth and espionage, while also taking inspiration from GTA through environment and style. The game was going to be its very own series, being a new pillar of fame to the collection, taking the player through the world of Cold War espionage set in the 1970s, experiencing ideological tensions, counterintelligence, political assassination, and all the fun a Cold War could bring. The game began production in 2007, being formally announced in 2009 and treated as a new big game for Rockstar. Then some time went and they were still making it. Then the PS4 came out and there were no news of moving the game from PS3 to PS4. Then they removed it from the website, and finally in 2021, some 14 years after production began, the title of Agent has nothing to do with Rockstar. So, why did they pump so much hype and effort into a game only to abandon it? Well, honestly, we don't really know. When scrapping games like Agent, publishers like to keep quiet to not look stupid or look like they just wasted money and time. Maybe the zeitgeist just wasn't there. Maybe they were too ambitious. Maybe GTA was enough for them. But in the end, we might never really know the real answer to why Agent, a new mainstream title, was just cancelled for no apparent reason. Project Dream, or just Dream, Land of Giants, was an N64 game developed by Rare. The game starred a boy named Edson, along with his pets Dingo the dog and Billy the parrot. In this 3D RPG, Edson had to find a liquid called Floaty before a band of pirates could. Dream was going to be a new standalone title that Rare could put in their trophy room with the many other titles. The use of fairy tale thematics, fantastical themes, and a pirate theme would make the game a unique and memorable blend. It was going to be an ambitious game that would hit different, yet it was apparently too ambitious. As it seems, the entire dev team went from working on Dream to none other than Donkey Kong Country 2, and Dream was kinda just left to rot in the background. Eventually, the whole project was dismantled as Rare didn't see it fit to continue development. So, they made a new project out of the inspiration of Dream, that being Banjo-Kazooie. Edson does also have a slight resemblance to Banjo, just like how Dingo and Billy could be seen as a Kazooie type of character. So, while being cancelled, the feeling of Dream can be found in Banjo-Kazooie, and as a marketing choice, it was perhaps the best one to make, at least in hindsight.
Yeah, this game is so weak. Yeah.
The Cheetah Man trilogy is a trilogy consisting of one game, since Cheetah Man 2 and 3 were never officially released. Cheetah Man 1 is known mainly for its theme tune and the fact that some consider it the worst game to ever be released. It hardly even works, the mechanics are pure shit, and the designs are, well, you know. But that is Cheetah Man 1. Cheetah Man 2 is another being. While being cancelled because of the closing of Active Enterprise, the developers and publishers of the games, it wasn't dead per se, because some 1,500 copies of the game were found in a warehouse in Florida, despite being cancelled. Florida, of all states. After they were found, they were sold on the second market as an antique masterpiece. So even though the game was cancelled, it was rediscovered and played through. And oh man, it is far from an improvement, being worse than Cheetah Man 1 in so many ways. It is surely different in both design, playthrough style, and a lot more, but it's still a very terrible game with a bunch of glitches and need for tweaking stuff. So don't even add me about the third one, alright? That's a whole different cake I'm not gonna talk about.
Her world.
Project Ragtag is a codename for an unreleased Star Wars action-adventure game following a fleet of space scoundrels through space. The game has jumped from scenario to scenario in the last 10 years, starting off as a simple game project under the guidance of Amy Hennig and the development of his Carol games. While at first only being about a simple heist, things got more interesting as Disney bought Lucasfilm and therefore also the game development studio LucasArts, which they then quickly dissolved. This made EA jump in to help Miss Carroll on their many Star Wars projects, including Ragtag, which now got smushed together with another cancelled game called Jamaica, a game all about pirates, making Ragtag about a group of pirates performing a heist. This only lasted so long, as EA released Battlefront in 2015, a clear-cut success and therefore also a game that EA want to invest more in, slowly leaving Ragtag in the dust, because money. This even left some Miss Carroll developers thirsting for more, leaving for other projects until development was stalled entirely, leaving Ragtag to be cancelled in the end. As it was neither a profitable idea nor an attractive one for the developers. While it is officially cancelled at the moment, in April 2022, Lucasfilm Games and Skydance New Media announced the making of a game with Henning serving as head of the project on an action-adventure Star Wars game which could be the unofficial rival of Project Ragtag. It is a bit too familiar, but in the end, it could also just not be. While we don't know much about the game, despite the direction it was heading, many Star Wars fans still looked up to the game and saw it as a good game for the franchise. But in the end, it just never came out. Super Mario Spikers were going to be another one of those Mario sports games. Although, Spikers was a weird game, even by those standards. Since the name is Super Mario Spikers, which sport do you think they had in mind? If you ignore the background for a moment. Well, it was both volleyball and wrestling in one. A volleyball-wrestling hybrid, whatever that's supposed to be. While it did begin as a clear-cut volleyball game, even having the early working title of Mario Volleyball, the creators at Next Level Games thought it would be a good idea to mix in some mechanics from one of their previous projects, that being WWE Titans Parts Unknown, into a Mario game about volleyball. What was even the thought behind that? This led to a game where Mario could on one hand play volleyball with his brother and then the next moment suplex Peach into the ground, and do other realistic wrestling moves. When pitched to Nintendo, their reaction was kind of predictable. The game was simply too aggressive and brutal for a wholesome franchise like Mario. The game was therefore simply thrown out the window because, well, obviously, why? However, Next Level Studio did use their knowledge gained while making the game to make Super Punch-Out. So, after all, it wasn't that bad. Far from, Punch-Out is a fantastic game. If you played it, Jesus, I love this game. Making a game about the show South Park is a thing that seems pretty straightforward today. The creators of the show has already made some amazing games about the show, and with South Park being so popular, making a game about it wouldn't seem that impossible or that stupid. But there was a time where such a task was apparently a bit too much to handle. There have been several South Park games that have flopped in the past, one being a platformer for the Game Boy Color. It was made in 1998, and was a simple platformer about the kids defeating a foe from space, and was even fully made, being ready to be shipped and sold. And honestly, sounded like a good game, which would have sold fine, until the creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, took a step back and thought, hey, why are we making a game about an adult show on a platform mainly for kids? Good question. Throw out everything! And so, they did. Kind of annoyed, but they still did it. Well, it wasn't entirely scrapped. In a 180 twist, the game was rebranded from South Park to Maya the Bee in Europe and the New Adventures of Maya, Kate, and Ashley in the US. Simply changing the textures into a Maya the Bee theme. Weirdly, however, the game still contains some South Park elements in their files. So while the South Park game is lost forever, you can still play the game, but as Maya the Bee. Half-Life is a game that is almost synonymous with Valve, and especially PC. Yet, with the help of Sierra Entertainment, Half-Life was going to be released on the Dreamcast. The reasoning for the port seems to be nothing more than expanding out and being a good business deal for both sides. The deal seems to go even further than just Half-Life, as it already had a second Valve disc prepared, featuring other Valve classics like CS and TFC. The port in itself was a slightly modified Half-Life game, featuring cheat codes and improved visuals and effects, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Of course, the game was never released, and the exact reason aren't really known. Shared Entertainment simply said that the marketing editions had changed, and they therefore dropped the game, after having been delayed several times. Even weirder, the game was dropped a mere month before release, and future leaks show a seemingly finished game ready to be shipped. While elements of the game was shipped back to PC as a Half-Life High Definition pack, the exact fate of codename 1672 is a bit of a mystery. Why would what seems to be Valve drop a deal like this a month before release? Copyrights? An unfair deal? We don't really know, and the fate of the Half-Life Dreamcast port is a very mysterious one, and a short-lived one too. City of the Dead, or any of the many names it apparently has, was going to be a first-person shooter game with a bunch of inspiration from the TV series Living Dead. It even featured some of the same locations like Ningun Futuro Island, and even some of the same actors. City of the Dead was going to be a classic zombie apocalypse game because, the US military meddled in some science and then boom, zombie apocalypse. The game was planned to piggyback off the success of The Living Dead and other zombie apocalypse movies to make a game that simply couldn't fail. Yet it did, as publishers, Hip Interactive, was a rather unstable and confused company. The game was cancelled not because of any production problems, but because Hip Interactive's tight budget and the lack of funding of the game, which therefore couldn't be finished. So it had all the qualities for a good game, but Hip Interactive just didn't want to spend the money on it, and now it is simply cancelled. So, calling Get Your Free TVs a cancelled game is a bit of a weird move. You see, Get Your Free TVs is actually the first ever Half-Life test level to be made. It could even be played as a demo, but never got further than that, because it wasn't meant to. It was here that Valve tried to make a script and a feeling for what Half-Life would be, involving a street war between gas mask citizens and the Metro cops. Now of course, the Half-Life games became something else, but this was where the franchise began. So saying it's a cancelled game is kinda weird. Yes, Get Your Free TVs never became a published game, but Half-Life did. An entire series actually, and it was supposed to, so there you have it. Am I missing something? What's happening here? Star Wars Ewok Adventure, also known as Revenge of the Jedi Game 1, is a cancelled Atari game from 1983, published by the Parker Brothers. What is interesting about this game is that it was actually finished and even playable, yet was cancelled by the marketing department because the game was too hard to master. So, instead of fixing the problem, they just scrapped the entirely finished game. Good marketing strategy right there. Despite being scrapped, there is actually one single copy of a prototype of the game out there somewhere, first being owned by Larry Goldberg, who later gave it to a colleague's son, most likely for safekeeping and a gift. However, the kid sold the game online for $1,680 pure cash. Now that kid has potential. Get that guy some cash. Oh wait, he already got some. Genius. The game in itself consisted of you controlling an Ewok gliding over indoor, trying to avoid the ATSTs and speeder bikers, while trying to attack a shield generator at the very end. A quite simple game, which was apparently too hard for 1980s kids. Kurayami is a game I've talked about before on this channel, which I guess is to be expected with how similar many of my videos are. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The game is inspired by the writings of Joseph Kafka, and especially his book The Castle. Kafka, as a writer, is known for his alienating and psychological horror-like writing, which the games take full inspiration from. The game differs from many others, mainly in its use of lighting, where all danger and horror can be found in the dark, and safe areas can be found in the light. While being far from a foreign concept, as a game mechanic it is quite unique. Kurayami seems to be a game fit for release, having an original concept and all the details needed to stand out in the gaming franchise. So why is it cancelled? Well, apparently the developers had bigger fish to fry, and put Kurayami aside. The games they would rather work on were Zero, Tsukihami no Kamen, and No Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle, and thus the game was left abandoned in the dark. An ironic end for a game all about escaping the dark. Eight Days is such a cancelled game that it is actually on the list twice. Must be good then. 8 Days seems to have been quite the ambitious game, being the largest map game at the time, if it had been released of course, and also spanning over 8 days, with real-time time where it would be night in the game if it was night in real life. It also has some 120 people working on the game at their height. In the game, you would follow a good guy and a bad guy, who are both after a mob syndicate for different reasons. The bad guy wants brutal revenge, and the good guy wants to search for the mob and get his son back. But of course, it never happened. I mean, why is it on here? What do you think? Sony wanted more manpower on other games, and therefore let the game slowly die out until the plug was finally pulled. It seems to have been under production for some 4 years before being cancelled, it only ever reaching the pre-production phase in that time. Either because it was too ambitious, or because too few people worked on it, despite those, 120 people working on it, but hey, here we are. As Valve prepared to make a new Team Fortress game, that being Team Fortress 2, they weren't sure on which way to go. At first, they thought about making a more militaristic and more realistic military fighting game, to rebranch Team Fortress as a more clear-cut and perhaps more popular first-person shooter. But that was apparently a bit too predictable and not really that fun. So they had to do something else. A 180 and make a very weird game, but still a first-person shooter. We got Team Fortress 2, a game that is indeed weird, but also quite charming. But that wasn't a direct project after Brotherhood, the direct military first-person shooter. No, in between, a game about aliens and humans was made called Team Fortress Invasion. We have a bunch of concept art from the game, and also a kind of how-to on how the game would work. It seems that the game mechanics were still a class-based shooter, but more the line of Rising Storm 2 Vietnam than the original Team Fortress, with a cap on which characters and classes you could pick, and there also being a generic option along with a commander option. The teams are clear-cut, humans versus aliens, where the aliens were some very weird beings, but the humans seemed a bit familiar. This was again where Team Fortress 2 had its, how would you call it, birth? It is here we see the start coming through with a medic, soldier and the likes, slowly coming into being, slowly being Team Fortress 2. Yet Team Fortress Invasion was their first real shot at a wacky first-person shooter. I did make a whole video about it, so there's a bunch to study in it, but mainly it was just a Team Fortress 2 with aliens, with some weird but workable concepts. And of course, it was cancelled and replaced with TF2. A better idea in my opinion, as the game is still alive and playable to this very day. Saints Row Money Shot is one of the many apparent cancelled Saints Row games. I just picked this one because, funny title. Much better than the first title of simply Drive-By. In this game, you would go around the abnormal and crazy world of Saints Row, but you have some interesting game mechanics in this one. You see, in this game, you can control the bullet to sway anywhere you want. Just don't hit walls or, people, and it will continue as you say. Swinging from right to left to up and down as you please. That is why it's the money shot. You see, it's a pun. It's a good one too. When it was in development as Drive-By, the vice president of THQ said it was going to be a unique and new experience for the franchise. Well, after it got cancelled, like almost right after. 5 months, but This was due to THQ having quite a lot of issues, which ended up affecting Money Shot. While the game was scrapped, some elements of the game can be found in the DLC with the same name. So hey, not totally cancelled, but yeah, totally cancelled. Believe it or not, but there is currently, technically, a sequel for Happy Wheels on the way. On the other hand, it has been like that since 2012, so maybe not. The game is set to be released in 2024 to 25, so it isn't really cancelled per se, but I can still see why it's being set to be cancelled, or at least on this list. There isn't that much to be said about the game in itself. It is simply an upgraded version of Happy Wheels, with apparent 3D animated characters, a downloadable link, and a paywall if you want to make levels. Besides that, it has been underway for some 11 years, so I doubt he will check it out in the last seconds, especially since he has spent so much time on it.
Freeze, Cracker!
Sonic Crackers is an odd entity of a game, as it seems to be nothing more than a pitch from within the Sega company, which was then later turned into a game called Chaotix, a whole different game. Now, most people know that the Sonic franchise can be kinda weird, but a title like Crackers seems really out of the ordinary, but there is a reason behind it. You see, Sonic Crackers is most likely a mistranslation from the Japanese word
ソニッククラッカー
where the word clackers, like the toy, is most likely meant instead of crackers. This comes from the fact that in the game, Sonic and Tails were bound together, having to use each other's abilities to get through levels, so both speed and flight at the same time. But in a weird, bound together way that makes sense in a way. Perhaps that's why the game wasn't picked up by Sega. Yet, it has been picked up as a game called Chaotix. But as a game in itself, it never really went far and was simply killed off before it could even begin as a game. So we don't know almost anything. We have the name and then the concept, that's about it. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, the game, is a game with mechanics you can most likely already guess. Mild objectives where you go from A to B on tracks. An easy game for small dumb kids. It was actually released on both the Sega Genesis and SNES as, actual game which you can buy and play. Well, I guess you don't sell it anymore, but you can still buy it. Yet a port for the NES was also going to be released, but was cancelled for unknown reasons. Maybe because they didn't see it fit to make a child's game like Thomas the Tank Engine for an older console, but that's just my guess. The game is actually kind of bad at being a cancelled game. Yes, the NES game is cancelled, take the title, but we already have the game for 2 other consoles, and a prototype of the NES game which was found in 2014, which was uploaded on the internet, and you can play it right now if you have nothing better to do. Which you do. Continue watching. Now, stay here. Please. But the soundtrack is banging. TT Games, the developers behind all the LEGO games we hold so dear to our hearts, have always been keen on making LEGO games. As it seems, sometimes they'd even begun prototypes of some LEGO games before different companies even gave them the green light. A bit of a gamble. As said by John Byrne on his YouTube channel, he had made models for a LEGO Indiana Jones game before the game was even a possibility. Along with that, he had also made plans for a LEGO James Bond game. In his opinion, a LEGO James Bond game would fit quite perfectly, despite there not seemingly being any LEGO James Bond sets underway by LEGO. Yet, TT Games kept their heads high and were prepared to make a game like that into reality. While no real game was underway per se, we do have some concept animations and the main man himself, LEGO James Bond. Despite TT Games having high hopes, they quickly dimmed when Casino Royale was released, which prompted a darker turn to the franchise, which of course didn't go well with a kids game. So both LEGO and TT Games threw in the towel and said, well, maybe there's something else, like this. Ah, money. Epic Donald is not only Trump's gamertag, but it is also a game that was going to be a kind of spin-off of the Epic Mickey Mouse series. By Disney, of course. It was going to be a similar game to the Epic Mickey Mouse games, but of course with Donald Duck instead. It was also going to be a kind of memorandum to Carl Barks, the creator of many Donald Duck comics, and the many adventures he could make in his comics. In the game, Donald Duck would travel through time and help many different characters from the Donald Duck comics, having a pure adventure feel over it. Again, it is an Epic Mickey Mouse game, so it's simply that kind of style. Despite seeming to be a good fit for the series, it was eventually cancelled because of technical issues, whatever that might be, and along with that, they feared that the game would get bad reviews and a bad sale rate. Sonic Jr. was going to be a game with the Sega Genesis, which in itself seems to be nothing more than a normal Sonic game, but with a younger cast of characters, as the title kind of says. However, we don't know if Sonic Jr. is referring to an infant version of Sonic, or if it's Sonic's son. Most likely the first one, because making Sonic a dad is kind of weird, even by their standards. We don't know much about the game because it was killed in its infancy. Sonic Jr. was going to be another game in a row of junior games where several of Sega's main characters were going to get a baby version of themselves in a game, as a kind of marketing concept. A choice which isn't that crazy when you think about it, it's kind of normal. However, Sega fans didn't really agree, as the first junior game, that being Echo the Dolphin Jr., was a huge flop. So, instead of doubling down on the concept in hopes that it might just work out this time, they just scrapped the whole concept and just went back to normal. So while they probably wanted to make a bigger deal out of these junior games, and especially Sonic Jr., they quickly shut their mouth and acted like nothing ever happened. Perhaps a wise choice, but I don't really know. Boo Hunt is a cancelled Nintendo DS project by Retro Studios, featuring a Boo from the Mario franchise, yet this seems to be far from an ordinary Mario game. While there are some enemies like Boos and Chain Chomps, the game in itself seems to be almost Mario free, focusing more on a small Boo who have just graduated Hart University and now has to go on an adventure with its new possessive powers. We know very little of this game, as it seems to have been cancelled very early in development. Yet we do have some interesting and weird screenshots like wacky houses, entirely new enemies, new Boo concepts, and weirdest of all, a Jew Boo and a crucified Boo. Apparently, religion was gonna have some kind of say in this game. These two images makes me wonder if the game got cancelled for being too out of line with Nintendo policies. I mean, there were some unnerving feels when Nintendo made a Legend of Zelda temple slightly Muslim themed. Can't imagine Bejeu and Boo's Christ was gonna make the cut. Overall, Boo Hunt seems to have been a very cool concept, but also one that evolved into something too new and radical for what Nintendo could handle. So it went into the pile with the others. At least that's a theory, and no, shut up. LEMMiNO was a game that started development around 2014 by EA Games, assisted by Arcane Studios, and weirdly directed by Steven Spielberg himself. Weird seeing this guy down here, but hey, here he is. LEMMiNO as a game would feature parkour elements along with an adventure role-playing style of gameplay, in a way which would be groundbreaking. Many critics, gamers, and lost media enthusiasts call this a missing masterpiece of art, and a game most people would clearly buy. Which might be because there's a lot of big names to it, but who knows, it's a theory. The game has gotten a bunch of good feedback for its authenticity, which is impressive for a game that isn't even released. But said groundbreaking qualities seems to have also been its downfall. We have to go ahead a whole 6 years in the year 2010 when the game got cancelled, simply for being too expensive, ambitious, and hard to produce. And therefore, a new masterpiece of gaming was lost for the price of time. Or I guess the price of money, depending on how you see it, but eh. Platform fighting games like Super Smash Bros. Are always a good concept for a game. Yet, to truly pull off a Smash Bros. Feel, you need a big and diverse cast of characters that can make the game feel alive and thrilling. This is probably also why so few companies have been able to pull it off. One company that could pull this off would be Disney. They got the audience, the characters, and the money to make a game like that possible. And I mean, it isn't that bad of an idea at all. I'm sure a bunch of people would enjoy such a game, including me, which is also why I was on the table for a short time. There have been some Disney leaks showing what seems to be a fighting style game between different Disney characters. Apparently, this job was given to Buenos Vistas Games, which was shortly lived, as it apparently must have been cancelled for some reason. Why? Well, we don't know. We know nothing about this game at all, besides the fact that it seems to have been a concept. Maybe it's because having all these enjoyable Disney characters beating the fuck out of each other would be a bad idea for their image and marketing. It is a kid-friendly company, so. But I could imagine a few people still want to play it, so is it that bad of an idea? I wouldn't say so. If both Nintendo and Nickelodeon can pull it off, then so can Disney.
Damn. That sucks.
Rape Day is, no surprise, a rather controversial game, being ranked one of the most controversial games out there, despite never actually hitting the shelves. The game was an indie adult visual novel set in a zombie apocalypse where you played as a serial killer and serial rapist all in one, who would hunt down women, rape them, and then kill them. I hope my neighbors didn't hear that one, fucking Christ. This would happen through dialogue, where you could control who to rape and murder through different decisions. It is easy to hear that this was one of those games that were made to be controversial to get some kind of message across. The many comments by the creator, Desklamp, or at least codenamed Desklamp, also hints at this notion. One of the reasons that the game was made was apparently because of Steam Greenlight, a place where we could post trailers and demos of one's upcoming games to gain popularity, regardless of what kind of game it was, having nearly no restrictions at all. This was something that Desklamp wanted to test out, so he put Rape Day up there on Steam Greenlight to see what would happen. The game was then removed, followed by an update on the policies of Steam Greenlight. Being a game made purely to push boundaries and be provocative, it is easy to see why so many people found it too controversial, including some female members of the UK Parliament, online petitions, news outlets, and many more, which eventually won the battle and the game got cancelled for good. And now, it is never gonna be released. There's no hope, so just give up. I mean, don't play it, obviously. So, victory for humanity. Calling this a video game might be a slightly far-fetched idea, but then I guess we could go into the details of what is a video game and then it might just derail, so fuck it, we'll take those. The Burger CDI training programs were small programs of the Philips CDI, made for use in 1997, which some Burger King employees could use to train themselves in specific scenarios that they might face on their job. It would be a creative way of getting used to scenarios that would either be too hard to train through basic training, made up scenarios, or just an explanation. While it might be seen like an innovative choice by some, it never really caught on under high levels of management and was apparently thrown out of use pretty early on. We do have some footage of it, but as you can see, it looks more like a movie than anything else. It did have an educational purpose, so I guess don't expect like a Street Fighter game out of it. In the end, Burger King decided to scrap the idea of an educational video game, using other ways to educate their staff. Yet that didn't stop Burger King from making games. They've made a few bangers here and there.
Sneak.
Mario's Castle is a game we know very little about. Almost everything we know about the game is the title and the fact it will be a Mario game. If even, we don't even know that for sure. The reason for this is that the game is tied to a failed console, which Nintendo wanted to be a successor to the Game Boy, but ended up being a commercial failure. That project being Atlantis, a whole new handheld console which, for some reason, never became a real product. Project Atlantis seems to have been an early version of the Game Boy Color, being cancelled right as the Game Boy Color was released. Perhaps Mario's Castle 2 was re-released as a better version, for the now better handheld console, the Game Boy Color. Some of the first games for the Game Boy Color were games like Mario Golf, Tennis, and Deluxe, which I doubt is connected to Mario's Castle. Perhaps Game & Watch Gallery 2, but even that is kind of bizarre. So maybe we're just dealing with a Mario game which only got as far as the title. Who knows what type of game Mario's Castle might have turned out to be. These titles are so bizarre, I swear to God. Married, with children, as in I'm married to a person and also have kids, no Indian wedding here, is a game based off the sitcom of the same name. Now, making a game about a sitcom seems to be a pretty tough job, because those types of games don't have a big market. A sitcom is better as, well, a sitcom. So the company of Cicada was going to make it a bit more interesting by making it a Leisure Suit Larry type of game with a bunch of adult humor and bits. But even as it has some ideas for the game and plans to make it a successful one, something else came in the way, in the form of internal company politics. You see, the company of Cicada decided to switch from computer game making to NES game making, meaning that most of their former titles went on the back burner, aka left to rot completely. So Married with Children was simply a bar-gone game. It was going to be a game, but then they just decided to say, nah, not really, let's make an NES game instead. Steven Seagal is The Final Option is a game all about the likeness and coolness of Steven Seagal and his final option. And if you're wondering, this isn't a game about any of his movies. It is simply a game about Seagal as a person. Yeah, imagine that. The game had a lackluster plot about infiltrating a company called Nanotech to avenge a fallen partner, where he must defeat mercenaries, scientists, obstacles, and more, all by himself, of course, using his many skills. As you can hear, this is pretty much a game all about how great Steven Seagal is. And weirdly, he didn't even have a say in it. He didn't make it. Yes, the game about Steven Seagal has no connection to Steven Seagal. It isn't even known if he knows about the game at all. It was produced by at most 2 people, the main developer being a female graduate of Harvard School of Business who was also a bank manager. While being impressive, it isn't very useful when making a game, and she was not very good at it. Her naive ways of being seems to be one of the reasons why the game got cancelled. The game was delayed up to a year, whereafter it was simply cancelled. The reasoning for why it never hit the shelves might be because of lackluster spendings, along with, of course, bad development. Tom vs. Jerry: The Chase Is On is an unreleased game about Tom and Jerry. You know, the one. If you had a childhood, that is. If you didn't, and you don't know what Tom and Jerry is, then leave. No, please stay. The game was going to be released for the SNES and published by High-Tech Expressions as a simple Tom and Jerry game. While not being the first Tom and Jerry game by High-Tech, it was going to be a different one. Instead of a more classic platformer, this was a game where you, Jerry, constantly had to run away from Tom in a more action-filled game, but also quite true to the cartoons. It got quite far in development as a more modern league show, and even seems to be quite playable. So why was it cancelled? Well, it apparently just got cancelled. According to Vince Daisy on Twitter, a developer who worked on the game, the new owner of the publishers, Ted Turner, decided to cancel a whole lot of projects, including the Chases On. Yet this claim was apparently not true. It seems to be a bit confusing. But what seems to be true is that the game was cancelled because it was just decided to be cancelled. Along with that, the publishers did also go bankrupt, which might be kind of important. I don't know, might just add that to the notes. This is of course a rather big shame, as the game seems to be ready to be shipped and isn't even a half bad idea. But of course, it went under the classic failure of bad management. And then he wept, for there were no more entries left. Well, there are more entries left as you can see, but it'll be too long for this video, so in the future I might just make more videos with this iceberg. Here in the end credits I do want to talk about something, my lack of, well, anything in the last 5 months. There is a good reason for that, which I did talk about just before leaving. I went to the Danish military and got a basic military education. Why? Well, it's pragmatic, it's patriotic, and it's fun. It really was. I did plan on making videos while in the military, while I had free time, but when you work from 5 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon, from Monday to Friday, you can't just want to relax when you have the time, because you need to. You're battered after a week like that. So it just kind of didn't happen, naturally. But I'm back, and that is what truly matters.